Happy 70th birthday, Grandma Esperanza. Enjoy it. This is your last one. My own granddaughter smiled sweetly as she said those chilling words, while I sat surrounded by my life's work worth $2.8 million. What I discovered about my family's true intentions that night would change everything, and what I did next ensured they never forgot the woman they tried to bury alive. I'm grateful to have you here with me today. Please follow my story until the end and comment what state you're watching from so I can see how far the story reaches. My name is Esperanza Delgado-Castellanos, and at 70 years old, I thought I understood what family loyalty meant. But let me start from the beginning, because to understand the depths of betrayal I would soon face, you need to know who I really am and what I had built with my own two hands. I arrived in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1975 as a 21-year-old single mother with my infant son Ricardo in my arms and exactly $47 in my pocket. I had fled an abusive marriage in Guadalajara, Mexico, carrying nothing but hope and an unshakable determination to give my child a better life than the poverty and violence we'd left behind. Those first years were brutal in ways I can barely describe. I cleaned office buildings at night while Ricardo slept in a playpen I'd set up in the janitor's closet. During the day, I worked in restaurant kitchens, my hands raw from constant washing and burns from hot oil. I learned English by watching soap operas on a black and white TV I'd bought for $15 at a pawn shop, scribbling down phrases in a notebook and practicing pronunciation until my tongue ached. But I had a dream that burned brighter than my exhaustion. I would own my own business someday. Not just any business, but something that would employ other immigrant women like me. Women who needed a chance to prove their worth in a country that often saw them as invisible. In 1978, I started Esperanza's Cleaning Solutions, with a used vacuum cleaner and a bucket of supplies that cost me 3 months' worth of saved quarters. I began by cleaning houses in the wealthy neighborhoods of Northeast Albuquerque, areas where my son and I could never afford to live, but where I would scrub toilets and dust furniture belonging to people who treated me like part of the wallpaper. Ricardo would come with me on weekends, doing his homework at kitchen tables in mansions while I worked. I remember him looking up from his math problems one Saturday and asking, "Mommy, why do these people have so many rooms they don't even use?" "Because they have opportunities we don't have yet, mijo. But someday we'll have our own big house, and we'll remember what it felt like to clean other people's." That someday came sooner than I dared to hope. By 1985, I had 12 employees and contracts with 3 major office buildings downtown. By 1990, Esperanza's Cleaning Solutions had grown into Delgado Commercial Services, providing not just cleaning, but complete facility management for hotels, hospitals, and government buildings across New Mexico. I married my second husband, Antonio Castellanos, in 1987. He was a good man who loved Ricardo like his own son and helped me expand the business with his background in accounting and administration. Together, we had 2 more children, my daughter Marisol in 1988 and my youngest son Eduardo in 1991. Antonio understood my drive because he'd come from similar struggles. His family had lost their farm in El Salvador during the Civil War, and he'd worked construction jobs while putting himself through night school to become an accountant. We were partners in every sense of the word, building not just a business but a legacy we hoped would secure our children's futures for generations. By 2010, what had started as a cleaning service had evolved into Delgado-Castellanos Enterprises, a facilities management company with over 200 employees and contracts worth $15 million annually. We owned commercial real estate, had investments in 3 smaller businesses, and maintained contracts with some of the largest organizations in the Southwest. When Antonio passed away suddenly from a heart attack in 2019, I thought my world would collapse. But my children stepped up in ways that made me proud. Ricardo, now 48, took over the financial operations. Marisol, 35, managed human resources and client relations, and Eduardo, 32, handled facilities management and equipment procurement. For 4 years, we'd worked together as a family, honoring Antonio's memory and building on everything we'd created together. I remained the majority owner and CEO, but I'd gradually shifted more daily responsibilities to my children, preparing them to eventually take full control. I thought I was raising them to value hard work, integrity, and taking care of family. I thought I was showing them that success means lifting others up, not stepping on them to climb higher. I was wrong about so many things. Looking back now, I can see signs I should have noticed earlier. But when you love your family unconditionally, when you've worked for decades to give them every opportunity you never had, you tend to see their best qualities and excuse their flaws as temporary phases or understandable stress. Ricardo had always been my serious child, the one who understood responsibility from an early age because he'd lived through our hardest years. As an adult, he'd married a woman named Patricia Morales, a real estate agent who came from a middle-class family in Santa Fe. They had 2 children, my grandson Diego, now 22 and finishing his business degree, and my granddaughter Lucia, 19 and studying pre-law. Patricia had always been polite to me, but there was something in her eyes that made me uncomfortable. She had a way of looking at our family business like she was appraising property, calculating values and potential profits. When she thought no one was listening, I'd heard her make comments about how old-fashioned some of our business practices were, how we could be making more money if we modernized our approach. Esperanza still thinks like a small business owner, she once told Ricardo when she didn't realize I was in the next room. She's too sentimental about employees, too generous with benefits. We could increase profits by 30% if we just made some practical changes. Practical changes. I knew what that meant. Cutting jobs, reducing benefits, treating employees like numbers instead of people with families to feed. Everything Antonio and I had sworn we'd never do. Marisol had married young to a man named Steven Rodriguez, a construction foreman who seemed decent enough but had expensive tastes that always seemed to exceed his income. They had 3 children, twins Carlos and Carmen, now 16, and my youngest granddaughter, Isabella, who had just turned 14. Stephen had a gambling problem that Marisol tried to hide, but I knew about the debts, the late-night arguments about missing money, the times she'd quietly asked for small loans that were never repaid. I gave her the money because she was my daughter and because I didn't want my grandchildren to suffer for their father's weaknesses. But I'd started to notice that Stephen's financial problems seemed to get worse whenever the business was doing particularly well. It was as if he saw our family's success as a resource for his own irresponsibility. Eduardo had remained unmarried, which suited his personality. He was my free spirit, the artistic one, who'd initially wanted to be a musician before practical concerns drew him into the family business. He lived in a trendy loft in Old Town Albuquerque and drove a BMW that cost more than I'd made in my first 5 years of business. Eduardo had expensive tastes and expensive friends. He frequented galleries and restaurants where dinner for 2 could cost $300, dated women who wore clothes worth more than many of our employees made in a month, and had developed a lifestyle that required significantly more money than his salary from the business provided. I supplemented his income because I wanted him to be happy, because I remembered being young and dreaming of beautiful things I couldn't afford. But I'd begun to wonder if my generosity was enabling him to avoid developing the discipline and financial responsibility that had made our family's success possible. The idea for my 70th birthday celebration had been Marisol's suggestion, presented during our monthly family business meeting in early September. "Mommy, you've been working for 50 years, she said, looking around the conference table at her brothers, their families, and me. 70 is a milestone birthday. We should do something special to honor everything you've accomplished." The suggestion immediately gained enthusiasm from everyone present. Ricardo started talking about renting a venue that could accommodate all our employees, business partners, and extended family. Eduardo proposed hiring a mariachi band and a photographer to document the celebration. Patricia mentioned several high-end catering companies she had worked with through her real estate contacts. Lucia suggested that they have it at the Hotel Albuquerque. She was my youngest granddaughter, but had inherited the family tendency toward ambitious thinking. They have that beautiful ballroom with the mountain views. It would be elegant enough for your business associates, but traditional enough for Tia Abuela and the family from Mexico. Diego, who'd been quiet during most family meetings since starting college, surprised me by volunteering to create a video presentation.
I could interview employees, business partners, maybe some of the community leaders you've worked with over the years. Make it a real tribute to your legacy. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself getting excited about the idea. I'd never been one for big parties. Antonio and I had always preferred quiet celebrations with close family. But the thought of gathering everyone who'd been part of our journey felt meaningful. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. But I want it to be a celebration of our family business, not just me. Everyone who works for Delgado-Castellanos Enterprises should be invited with their families. This company exists because of their hard work. I should have been suspicious when Patricia and Stephen exchanged a quick look at that suggestion. I should have noticed that Eduardo seemed more interested in the party planning than he had ever been in any business meeting. I should have questioned why Ricardo immediately started asking detailed questions about my retirement plans and succession planning. But I was focused on the joy of bringing together everyone who mattered to me, everyone who'd been part of building something meaningful from nothing. The planning process took over our family dinners for the next 6 weeks. Every conversation seemed to revolve around guest lists, menu choices, entertainment options, and scheduling. My children threw themselves into the preparations with an energy I hadn't seen from them in years. Marisol took charge of invitations and decorations. She had always had excellent taste, and I trusted her to create something beautiful that honored both our Mexican heritage and our American success story. Ricardo handled the financial arrangements and venue coordination. As our company's CFO, he was accustomed to managing large events and complex logistics. Eduardo focused on entertainment and special touches, the mariachi band, a photographer, flowers, and what he called surprise elements that he refused to reveal in advance.
Patricia had always been polite to me, but there was something in her eyes that made me uncomfortable. She had a way of looking at our family business like she was appraising property, calculating values and potential profits. When she thought no one was listening, I'd heard her make comments about how old-fashioned some of our business practices were, how we could be making more money if we modernized our approach. Esperanza still thinks like a small business owner, she once told Ricardo when she didn't realize I was in the next room. She's too sentimental about employees, too generous with benefits. We could increase profits by 30% if we just made some practical changes. Practical changes. I knew what that meant. Cutting jobs, reducing benefits, treating employees like numbers instead of people with families to feed. Everything Antonio and I had sworn we'd never do. Marisol had married young to a man named Stephen Rodriguez, a construction foreman who seemed decent enough, but had expensive tastes that always seemed to exceed his income. They had 3 children, twins Carlos and Carmen, now 16, and my youngest granddaughter Isabella, who had just turned 14. Stephen had a gambling problem that Marisol tried to hide, but I knew about the debts, the late-night arguments about missing money, the times she'd quietly asked for small loans that were never repaid. I gave her the money because she was my daughter and because I didn't want my grandchildren to suffer for their father's weaknesses. But I'd started to notice that Stephen's financial problems seemed to get worse whenever the business was doing particularly well. It was as if he saw our family's success as a resource for his own irresponsibility. Eduardo had remained unmarried, which suited his personality. He was my free spirit, the artistic one who'd initially wanted to be a musician before practical concerns drew him into the family business. He lived in a trendy loft in Old Town Albuquerque and drove a BMW that cost more than I'd made in my first 5 years of business. Eduardo had expensive tastes and expensive friends. He frequented galleries and restaurants where dinner for 2 could cost $300, dated women who wore clothes worth more than many of our employees made in a month, and had developed a lifestyle that required significantly more money than his salary from the business provided. I supplemented his income because I wanted him to be happy, because I remembered being young and dreaming of beautiful things I couldn't afford. But I'd begun to wonder if my generosity was enabling him to avoid developing the discipline and financial responsibility that had made our family's success possible.
The idea for my 70th birthday celebration had been Medisol's suggestion, presented during our monthly family business meeting in early September. "Mommy, you've been working for 50 years," she said, looking around the conference table at her brothers, their families, and me. "70 is a milestone birthday. We should do something special to honor everything you've accomplished." The suggestion immediately gained enthusiasm from everyone present. Ricardo started talking about renting a venue that could accommodate all our employees, business partners, and extended family. Eduardo proposed hiring a mariachi band and a photographer to document the celebration. Patricia mentioned several high-end catering companies she'd worked with through her real estate contacts. "We could have it at the Hotel Albuquerque," Lucia suggested. She was my youngest granddaughter, but had inherited the family tendency toward ambitious thinking. "They have that beautiful ballroom with the mountain views. It would be elegant enough for your business associates, but traditional enough for Tia Abuela and the family from Mexico." Diego, who'd been quiet during most family meetings since starting college, surprised me by volunteering to create a video presentation. "I could interview employees, business partners, maybe some of the community leaders you've worked with over the years. Make it a real tribute to your legacy." Their enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself getting excited about the idea. I'd never been for big parties. Antonio and I had always preferred quiet celebrations with close family, but the thought of gathering everyone who'd been part of our journey felt meaningful. "If we're going to do this," I said, "let's do it right. But I want it to be a celebration of our family business, not just me. Everyone who works for Delgado-Castellanos Enterprises should be invited with their families. This company exists because of their hard work." I should have been suspicious when Patricia and Stephen exchanged a quick look at that suggestion. I should have noticed that Eduardo seemed more interested in the party planning than he'd ever been in any business meeting. I should have questioned why Ricardo immediately started asking detailed questions about my retirement plans and succession planning. But I was focused on the joy of bringing together everyone who mattered to me, everyone who'd been part of building something meaningful from nothing. The planning process took over our family dinners for the next 6 weeks. Every conversation seemed to revolve around guest lists, menu choices, entertainment options, and scheduling. My children threw themselves into the preparations with an energy I hadn't seen from them in years. Marisol took charge of invitations and decorations. She had always had excellent taste, and I trusted her to create something beautiful that honored both our Mexican heritage and our American success story. Ricardo handled the financial arrangements and venue coordination. As our company's CFO, he was accustomed to managing large events and complex logistics. Eduardo focused on entertainment and special touches, the mariachi band, a photographer, flowers, and what he called surprise elements that he refused to reveal in advance.
Even the grandchildren got involved. Diego worked on his video project with the seriousness of a professional filmmaker, conducting interviews and gathering footage from our company's history. Lucia and the twins helped with decorations and party favors. Isabella, my youngest granddaughter, seemed especially excited about what she called the special presentation. The whole family appeared to be united in creating a perfect celebration for me. For the first time since Antonio's death, I felt like we were truly working together toward a common goal, like the grief and adjustment period was finally behind us. I should have realized that when something seems too perfect, it usually is. October 15th, 2024, my 70th birthday, dawned clear and crisp, with the kind of brilliant blue sky that makes New Mexico feel like the most beautiful place on earth. I woke up in the house Antonio and I had built in the foothills overlooking the city, surrounded by reminders of everything we'd accomplished together. The Hotel Albuquerque ballroom had been transformed into something magical. Marisol had outdone herself with decorations that honored my Mexican roots while celebrating our American success. Papel picado in our company colors, centerpieces featuring marigolds and white roses, elegant lighting that made everyone look glamorous. Over 300 people attended. Current and former employees came with their families, some driving from as far away as Phoenix and Denver. Business partners I'd worked with for decades shared stories about deals we'd negotiated and challenges we'd overcome together. Community leaders I'd collaborated with on various charitable projects spoke about our company's commitment to supporting local organizations.
The video Diego had created brought tears to my eyes. Employee after employee spoke about how working for Delgado-Castellanos enterprises had changed their lives, how he'd helped them buy their first homes, supported them through family emergencies, provided educational opportunities for their children, treated them with dignity and respect in an industry where workers are often invisible. Maria Santos, who'd been with us for 15 years and now managed our largest hospital contract, said something that made my heart swell with pride. Señora Esperanza didn't just give us jobs. She gave us hope. She showed us that we could be successful while still being good people, that business doesn't have to be about taking advantage of others. During the dinner, Ricardo gave a speech that seemed to capture everything I'd hoped to achieve as a mother and businesswoman. My mother came to this country with nothing but determination and love for her family, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. She built this company not just to create wealth, but to create opportunities for us, for our employees, for our community. Tonight, we celebrate not just her 70th birthday, but the legacy of integrity and generosity she's built over 5 decades. Marisol presented me with a custom piece of jewelry, a pendant incorporating the logos of all the charities our company had supported over the years, set with stones representing the birthstones of all my children and grandchildren. Eduardo surprised me with a mariachi performance of Las Mañanitas, followed by my favorite boleros from my youth. Hearing those songs in that beautiful room surrounded by everyone I loved made me feel like my life had come full circle in the most perfect way possible. But the moment that meant the most to me came when my grandchildren took the stage together. Diego and Lucia had written a song about our family's journey from Mexico to New Mexico, from poverty to prosperity. The twins played guitar while Isabella sang in Spanish and English, her voice clear and strong as she told the story of dreams realized through hard work and faith. As I listened to my granddaughter sing about overcoming obstacles and building something lasting for future generations, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was what it had all been for, not just the money or the business success, but the knowledge that I'd raised children who understood the value of family, hard work, and treating others with dignity. The evening was everything I'd dreamed it could be and more. I felt celebrated, appreciated, and deeply loved by everyone who mattered in my life. After the hotel celebration ended and the guests departed, our immediate family returned to my house for what had become our tradition, a private gathering where we could relax, share more personal memories, and enjoy each other's company without the formal structure of a public event. My living room, with its comfortable furniture and walls covered with family photos spanning 5 decades, felt warm and intimate after the grandeur of the hotel ballroom. I'd changed from my formal dress into a comfortable caftan, and everyone else had loosened up as well, shoes kicked off, ties removed, children sprawling on the floor with leftover cake. "Abuela," said Carmen, one of the twins, "tell us again about your first office." I laughed, settling into my favorite armchair with a cup of café con leche. It wasn't really an office, mija. It was a corner of our apartment where I kept a folding table, a phone, and a shoebox full of business cards and receipts. "But you made it work," added Carlos, her twin brother. "You always made everything work." These were the moments I treasured most, when the grandchildren wanted to hear family stories, when the history of our struggles and successes became part of their understanding of who they were and what was possible for them. As the evening progressed, I found myself studying the faces around me, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude for how our family had grown and thrived. Ricardo sat with Patricia on the sofa, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. Marisol curled up in the window seat with Stephen, their earlier marital troubles seemingly forgotten in the warmth of the celebration. Eduardo had claimed the big leather chair that had been Antonio's favorite, looking elegant and sophisticated as he entertained the children with stories about the celebrities who'd attended some of our company's high-profile events. The grandchildren were scattered around the room in various comfortable positions. Diego editing footage on his laptop, Lucia reading a book while keeping one ear on our conversation, the twins playing a quiet card game, and Isabella sketching in a notebook she carried everywhere. "Mommy," Marisol said during a lull in conversation, "we have something special we want to give you, something private, just for family." Ricardo stood up and walked to the dining room, returning with an elegant wooden box I'd never seen before. "We worked together on this for months," he said, setting it carefully on the coffee table. "It represents everything we want you to know about how much you mean to us." My heart swelled as I opened the box to find a leather-bound album filled with photos, letters, and mementos from our family's history. The first page contained a photo of me holding baby Ricardo in our tiny apartment in 1975, next to a recent photo of all of us at last year's company Christmas party. Page after page documented our journey. Photos from Ricardo's high school graduation, Marisol's wedding, Eduardo's college art shows, the grandchildren at various ages. But interspersed with the family photos were business milestones: the day we signed our first major contract, the ribbon cutting when we opened our main office, newspaper articles about community awards we'd won. "It's beautiful," I whispered, touching a photo of Antonio and me dancing at our 20th anniversary party. "This must have taken so much work to put together." "We wanted to show you that we understand," Eduardo said quietly. "We understand that the business and the family aren't separate things, that everything you built was about love, not just money." But as I continued through the album, I began to notice something strange. The photos and documents became more recent as the pages progressed, but then they seemed to stop abruptly. The last several pages contained images and text that felt more like a memorial than a celebration. Formal business photos with captions written in past tense, as if describing someone who was no longer present. "This section is interesting," I said carefully, showing them a page titled "The Legacy of Esperanza Delgado-Castellanos, 1954 to 2024. It's written like an obituary. "Oh, that," Lucia said quickly. "I was helping with the layout and I accidentally used the template from a memorial book. We meant to fix it but ran out of time." The explanation seemed reasonable, but something about the way she delivered it, too fast, too casual, made me uneasy. I looked around the room and noticed that several family members were avoiding eye contact with me. "There's one more thing," Ricardo said, pulling out a manila envelope. "Legal documents we need to discuss." Ricardo's tone had shifted from celebratory to serious, and I felt a familiar wariness settle over me. In my experience, when family conversations moved from emotional to legal, it usually meant someone wanted something that couldn't be asked for directly. "What kind of legal documents?" I asked, setting the album aside and focusing my attention on my eldest son. "Succession planning documents," Patricia answered before Ricardo could speak. "We've been consulting with estate planning attorneys on the most effective ways to transfer business ownership while minimizing tax consequences." I studied Patricia's face as she spoke. She had the confident expression of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation, someone who knew exactly what they wanted and had prepared arguments for every potential objection. "I already have a will and estate plan," I said carefully. "Robert Martinez has been our family attorney for 15 years. Everything is properly structured." "But Mommy," Marisol interjected, "there have been major changes in tax laws since your last update, and with the business growing so much, there could be significant advantages to transferring ownership now rather than waiting." Eduardo leaned forward in his chair, his artistic hands gesturing as he spoke. "The way it was explained to us, if you transfer majority ownership now while you're healthy and alive, the family avoids massive estate taxes that could force us to sell parts of the business to pay the government." I felt like I was in a business meeting rather than a family celebration, but their concerns seemed legitimate. Estate planning was complex, and tax laws did change frequently. Perhaps they'd discovered strategies that Robert Martinez hadn't considered. "Show me what you're proposing," I said. Ricardo opened the manila envelope and spread several documents across the coffee table. Even upside down, I could see they were comprehensive. Multiple pages of legal text, signature lines, and notary sections. "The basic structure is simple," he explained. "You would transfer 75% ownership of Delgado-Castellanos Enterprises to the three of us, 25% each. You'd retain 25% ownership and continue as CEO for as long as you want, but the majority voting control would pass to us as a group. I felt my stomach tighten. 75%? That's not succession planning. That's handing over control of my company. Our company, Patricia corrected gently. It's always been a family business, Esperanza. This just makes that official. And there are other benefits, Stephen added, speaking up for the first time since Ricardo had introduced the legal documents. Asset protection, liability shields, corporate tax advantages that only apply when ownership is distributed among multiple family members. I looked around the room at my children and their spouses, all of whom were nodding along with these explanations as if they'd been part of extensive discussions I'd never been included in. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked quietly. "Planning is the wrong word," Marisol said quickly. "We've been researching options, consulting with professionals, trying to find the best ways to protect everything you've built." But something in her tone suggested that planning was exactly the right word. This felt orchestrated, rehearsed, like a presentation they'd given before, perhaps to each other, perhaps to the attorneys and accountants who'd prepared these documents. "I need to review these with Robert Martinez before I sign anything," I said firmly. "Of course," Ricardo agreed, but I noticed he and Patricia exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. "But Mommy, there are time-sensitive aspects to some of these strategies. The longer we wait, the less effective they become." Eduardo stood up and walked to my chair, kneeling beside it in a gesture that reminded me of him as a small boy asking for permission to do something he knew I might refuse. "Mommy, we're not trying to take anything away from you," he said, his voice soft and sincere. "We just want to make sure everything you've worked for stays in the family, no matter what happens. We want to protect your legacy." Looking into my youngest son's eyes, seeing what appeared to be genuine concern and love, I felt my resistance beginning to weaken. These were my children. I'd raised them to be honest, hardworking, and family-oriented. If they believed this was the best way to secure our future, perhaps I should trust their judgment. "I'll take the documents to Robert next week. If he agrees that this structure makes sense, then we can discuss moving forward." "That's all we ask," Ricardo said, but something in his expression suggested he'd hoped for a more immediate commitment. As the family began gathering their belongings to leave, I noticed that the legal documents remained spread across my coffee table. No one made any move to collect them or put them back in the envelope. "Don't you want to take these with you?" I asked Ricardo. "Those are your copies. Keep them, read them. Ask Robert any questions you have. We want you to feel completely comfortable with every aspect of this arrangement." The granddaughter's message. The family departures followed a familiar pattern that had developed since Antonio's death. Ricardo and Patricia left first, always citing early morning obligations. Marisol and Stephen gathered their teenagers efficiently, like parents accustomed to managing complex schedules. Eduardo lingered longest, usually helping me clean up and sharing quieter conversations after the crowd thinned. But that evening, something was different. As people prepared to leave, there seemed to be more whispering than usual, more exchanged glances, more of the subtle coordination that happens when a group is managing information they don't want to share openly. Isabella, my youngest granddaughter at 14, had been unusually quiet during the legal document discussion. She'd remained curled up in the corner of the sofa, supposedly focused on her sketching, but clearly listening to every word. Isabella was my artistic grandchild, the one who inherited my eye for beauty and Eduardo's creative sensitivity. She was also the most observant member of the family, often noticing details that adults missed. As her parents prepared to leave with the twins, Isabella approached me with the sweet smile I'd always adored. At 14, she was still young enough to show affection openly, unlike her older cousins who'd reached the age where hugging grandmothers in front of friends might be embarrassing. "Abuela Esperanza," she said, taking my hands in her smaller ones. "Thank you for the most beautiful birthday party. You looked so happy tonight. I was happy, mija, Aihim replied, squeezing her hands gently. Having my whole family here, seeing how proud you all are of what we've built together, it was perfect. Isabella's smile became somehow different, still sweet, but with something else underneath that I couldn't quite identify. I'm glad you enjoyed it so much. Really treasure this memory, okay? Of course, sweetheart. Tonight will always be special to me. She leaned closer, as if to whisper a secret or share something meant just for my ears. Her voice remained light and affectionate, but her words made my blood run cold. Happy 70th birthday, Abuela Esperanza. Enjoy it. This is your last one. Before I could process what she had said or ask her to explain, Isabella kissed my cheek with the same innocent sweetness she'd shown all evening and skipped away to join her parents. I stood in my foyer, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been the most joyous night of my life, trying to understand what my own granddaughter had just said to me. This is your last one. The words echoed in my mind as I watched the taillights of my family's cars disappear down my street. Had I misheard her? Had she meant something innocent that my tired mind had interpreted as threatening? Maybe she'd said, "This is your best one," or "This is your latest one." Some phrase that would make sense coming from a loving granddaughter.
The look that passed between Ricardo and Patricia told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't expected me to show up early, and they definitely hadn't planned on including me in whatever was happening in that conference room. "Fine," Patricia said after a moment, "but let us explain the context first so you understand what they're trying to accomplish." She led me toward the conference room, but instead of entering, she guided me to the smaller meeting room across the hall. Ricardo followed, closing the door behind us. "Mommy," Ricardo began, settling into a chair across from me, "we need to have a serious conversation about your future and the company's future." "What kind of conversation?" Patricia pulled out a folder I hadn't seen before. "We've been documenting some concerns about your decision-making over the past several months, things that suggest you might be experiencing some age-related cognitive changes." My blood ran cold. "What kind of things?" "The Henderson contract," Ricardo said. "You agreed to terms that will cost us nearly $200,000 in reduced profits over 2 years. When we asked you about it later, you seemed confused about what you'd agreed to." I remembered the Henderson contract clearly. It was a hospital maintenance deal where I'd accepted lower margins in exchange for a 5-year commitment and the potential for additional services. It was a strategic decision based on long-term relationship building, not confusion. That was a deliberate choice to establish a partnership that could lead to much larger contracts, I explained. "But you didn't discuss it with us," Patricia continued. "You made a major financial decision unilaterally, and when we questioned it, you became defensive and angry." "I became defensive because you were questioning my judgment about a business I've run successfully for decades." "There have been other incidents," Ricardo said, pulling out a notebook. "Last month you forgot about the monthly operations meeting and scheduled a dentist appointment during that time. 2 weeks ago, you called me by Eduardo's name 3 times during one conversation. You've been repeating stories at family dinners." I stared at my son in disbelief. These were the kinds of minor memory lapses that happen to everyone, regardless of age. But in the context of this conversation, they were being presented as evidence of cognitive decline. "Ricardo, you sometimes call your own children by each other's names. Does that mean you're mentally incompetent?" "It's different when you're 70 and responsible for a multi-million-dollar business," Patricia said. "The stakes are higher. The potential for serious mistakes is greater." I realized what was happening. They were building a case against me, documenting every small mistake or moment of confusion as evidence that I was no longer capable of running my own company. The legal documents weren't just about ownership transfer. They were about establishing grounds for having me declared incompetent. "Is this why you want me to sign those papers? So you can use the supposed evidence to have me removed from the company?" "We want you to sign those papers to protect yourself and the company,
but Ricardo's voice lacked conviction. If something were to happen to you, if your health declined, or if you developed dementia, the business would be protected. And if I don't sign them? The silence that followed answered my question more clearly than words could have. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Patricia finally said. Against Ricardo and Patricia's obvious wishes, I insisted on meeting with the attorneys in the conference room. What I discovered there confirmed my worst fears about what my family had been planning. The two men introduced themselves as Jonathan Whitfield and Michael Chen, partners in a firm specializing in elder law and capacity issues. They weren't estate planning attorneys. They were lawyers who helped families have elderly relatives declared legally incompetent. Mrs. Castellanos, Mr. Whitfield said, shaking my hand with the overly gentle manner people use when they think they're dealing with someone fragile. Your family has asked us to review some options for protecting your interests as you enter this new phase of your life. What new phase? Well, the natural aging process brings certain challenges, memory issues, difficulty with complex decision-making, increased susceptibility to financial exploitation. Your children want to ensure you're protected from these risks. I looked around the table at Ricardo, Patricia, and these two attorneys, all of whom were discussing my supposed mental decline as if I weren't sitting right there with them. I haven't experienced any of these problems, I said firmly. With respect, Mrs. Castellanos, people experiencing cognitive decline often lack insight into their condition. That's why family members and medical professionals need to step in to provide protection. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with the attorneys explaining various legal mechanisms for transferring decision-making authority from elderly individuals to their adult children. They spoke about me in the third person, as if I were a problem to be solved, rather than a person with rights and opinions. When they finally left, I remained in the conference room with Ricardo and Patricia, trying to process the full scope of what I had just witnessed. How long have you been planning this?
We're not planning anything, Ricardo said. We're preparing for possibilities. If your health declined, if you developed Alzheimer's or dementia, we need to have legal frameworks in place to protect everyone. But I don't have Alzheimer's or dementia. I don't have any health problems that affect my thinking. Not yet, Patricia said. But Mommy, you're 70 years old. The statistics for cognitive decline after age 70 are significant. We're trying to be proactive. You're trying to steal my company. The accusation hung in the air between us like a challenge thrown down on a battlefield. Ricardo's face went pale, but Patricia's expression hardened with something that looked almost like relief, as if she was glad we were finally having this conversation openly. We're trying to ensure this company survives and thrives for future generations, she said coldly. If that requires making difficult decisions about leadership transitions, then that's what we'll do. Even if those decisions involve having me declared mentally incompetent based on fabricated evidence? No one is fabricating anything, Ricardo said, but his voice was weak. We're documenting legitimate concerns. Calling your children by the wrong names is not a legitimate concern for business competency, Ricardo. Forgetting about one meeting is not evidence of dementia, and making business decisions you disagree with is not proof of cognitive decline. I stood up from the conference table, gathering the documents they'd left scattered across its surface. I'm taking these papers to Robert Martinez today. I want him to review not just the ownership transfer documents, but these competency evaluation procedures your new attorneys are recommending. Mommy, please don't make this adversarial, Ricardo pleaded. We're family. We should be able to work through this together. Family members don't conspire to have each other declared mentally incompetent, Ricardo. Family members don't hire attorneys to strip away each other's rights and decision-making authority. I walked toward the door, then turned back to face them one more time. I built this company to create opportunities and security for our family. I raised you to value honesty, integrity, and taking care of each other. Whatever you think you're doing here, it's not what I taught you, and it's not what your father would have wanted.
That afternoon, I drove to Robert Martinez's law office with a growing sense of urgency. Robert had been our family attorney for 15 years, handling everything from business contracts to Antonio's estate planning. If anyone could help me understand the legal implications of what my family was proposing, it would be him. But when I arrived at his office, I was told that Mr. Martinez was unavailable and wouldn't be able to see me for at least 2 weeks. His secretary, normally warm and accommodating, seemed uncomfortable and avoided eye contact as she delivered this message. 2 weeks? I said. This is urgent. Can't you make time for an existing client? I'm sorry, Mrs. Castellanos. His calendar is completely booked. I left the office feeling more isolated than I had since Antonio's death. My family was conspiring against me, my attorney was suddenly unavailable, and I was beginning to understand that this situation was more orchestrated than I had initially realized. On impulse, I drove to the office of Sarah Gonzalez, another attorney I knew through business connections. "Sarah," she said, greeting me warmly in her office, "what brings you here? How can I help you?" I explained the situation as objectively as I could, showing her the ownership transfer documents and describing the morning's meeting with the elder law attorneys. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious as I spoke. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Esperanza, I need to ask you some direct questions, and I want you to answer honestly. Have you experienced any memory problems, confusion, or difficulty making decisions?" "No more than anyone my age experiences occasionally. I'm sharp. I read financial reports, negotiate contracts, manage complex schedules. I'm not experiencing cognitive decline." "Have you noticed your family treating you differently over the past several months, excluding you from conversations, making decisions without consulting you, questioning your judgment more frequently than usual?" I thought about Patricia's comments about my old-fashioned business practices, Stephen's gambling debts that I was expected to cover without question, Eduardo's expensive lifestyle that I subsidized without discussion. "Yes," I said slowly. "They've been treating me more like a problem to be managed than like the person who owns and runs the company." Sarah nodded grimly. "What you're describing sounds like a systematic campaign to establish grounds for a competency challenge. The documentation your son mentioned, the meetings with elder law attorneys, the pressure to sign ownership transfer documents, these are all standard tactics used when families want to gain control over an elderly relative's assets. But they're my children. They wouldn't actually try to have me declared incompetent." "Esperanza, elder financial abuse is one of the fastest growing categories of crime in America. And unfortunately, it's most often perpetrated by adult children who feel entitled to their parents' assets."
The words hit me like a physical blow. Elder financial abuse. That's what this was. A systematic attempt to steal my company by convincing a court that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. What should I do? First, don't sign anything else without having it reviewed by an attorney who works for you, not for your family. Second, start documenting everything: conversations, meetings, any attempts to pressure or manipulate you. Third, consider having your own medical and psychological evaluations done to establish your cognitive competency. She paused, studying my face carefully. "And Esperanza, you need to understand that if they're this organized, if they've already consulted with elder law attorneys and started building a case, they're not going to stop just because you refuse to cooperate. This is likely to get much worse before it gets better." That evening, I returned home with Sarah's warnings echoing in my mind. If my family was planning to challenge my competency, I needed to understand exactly what they stood to gain and what I stood to lose. I spent the night going through financial documents, business records, and personal files, trying to get a complete picture of my assets and how they might be affected by the ownership transfer my children were proposing. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. Delgado-Castellanos Enterprises wasn't just worth the $3.8 million valuation I'd been using for planning purposes.
recent contract acquisitions and property appreciation had increased our value to nearly $5.2 million. Additionally, my personal assets, real estate, investments, and savings totaled another $1.8 million. If my children gained control of the business and successfully had me declared incompetent, they would control over $7 million in combined assets. Even more disturbing, the ownership transfer documents included provisions that would make it extremely difficult for me to regain control, even if I could prove my competency later. But the most shocking discovery came when I reviewed our business insurance policies. 3 months ago, someone had increased the key person life insurance on me from $500,000 to $2 million. The person who had requested this change was listed as Ricardo Castellanos, acting as CFO. Why would my son increase my life insurance without discussing it with me? Why would the beneficiary designations list all 3 children equally, rather than following the percentages outlined in my will? As I stared at those insurance documents, Isabella's words from the night before took on a more sinister meaning. "This is your last one." What if she hadn't been talking about my last birthday party? What if she'd been talking about my last birthday, period? The next morning brought a phone call that confirmed my growing fears about how orchestrated this campaign against me really was. "Mrs. Castellanos, this is Jennifer from Dr. Patterson's office. We need to schedule your annual physical, and the doctor has requested that you come in as soon as possible for some additional testing." Dr. Patterson had been my physician for 8 years. I'd had my annual physical just 4 months earlier and had been giving a clean bill of health. "What kind of additional testing?" I asked. "Oh, just some routine cognitive assessments. Dr. Patterson wants to establish baselines for future reference given your age." Cognitive assessments, baselines for future reference. The language was too similar to what the elder law attorneys had used the day before to be coincidental. Did someone from my family request these tests? There was a pause. "I'm not sure about that, Mrs. Castellanos, but the doctor did mention that your son had expressed some concerns about your memory and decision-making." I hung up the phone feeling like the walls were closing in around me. My family had not only consulted with attorneys about having me declared incompetent, they'd also contacted my doctor to begin building medical evidence to support their case. Instead of scheduling the appointment, I called Dr. Patterson's office back and asked to speak to him directly. "Dr. Patterson, this is Esperanza Castellanos. I understand you want to see me for cognitive testing based on concerns my family has expressed." "Yes, Mrs. Castellanos. Your son Ricardo called yesterday and mentioned that you've been experiencing some memory issues and confusion. He thought it would be prudent to have some assessments done." "Doctor, I saw you 4 months ago for my annual physical. At that time, did you observe any signs of cognitive decline or memory problems?" "Well, no, but did you ever exhibit confusion during our appointments? Have I ever seemed disoriented or unable to understand medical instructions?" "No, you've always been very sharp and engaged, but Mrs. Castellanos, sometimes family members notice changes that occur gradually, changes that might not be apparent during brief medical appointments." "Dr. Patterson, I'm going to ask you directly. Do you believe, based on your professional medical opinion from our interactions over the past 8 years, that I need cognitive testing?" The silence on the other end of the line was telling. "Honestly, Mrs. Castellanos, based on my observations, I wouldn't have thought to recommend such testing, but when family members express concerns, we generally take them seriously, even when those concerns might be motivated by factors other than genuine care for the patient's well-being. Another pause, and what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that my family may be trying to establish medical grounds for having me declared incompetent so they can gain control of my business assets, and I'm asking if you're willing to be part of that process. Dr. Patterson was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was more serious than I'd ever heard it.
Mrs. Castellanos, if you have concerns about your family's motivations, you should consult with an attorney who specializes in elder law. As your physician, my responsibility is to your health and well-being, not to family members who might have other agendas. Does that mean you won't order unnecessary cognitive testing based on unsubstantiated claims from my children? That means I'll only recommend medical procedures that I believe are medically necessary based on my professional assessment of your condition. And based on that assessment, you don't need cognitive testing at this time. It was the first piece of good news I'd received in 2 days. That afternoon, I decided to visit our main work sites to check on current projects and maintain my normal business routine. I was determined to not let my family's scheme interfere with the day-to-day operations that kept our company profitable and our employees paid. At the University Hospital maintenance site, I found Maria Santos, our longest-serving supervisor and someone I'd always trusted to give me honest feedback about company operations. "Señora Esperanza," Maria said, approaching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, "can we talk privately?" We walked to a quiet area away from the other workers, and Maria looked around to make sure we weren't being overheard before speaking. "I don't know if I should be telling you this, but I'm worried about you, and I think you need to know what's been happening." "What do you mean?" "Your son, Ricardo, has been coming to the job sites, talking to supervisors and crew leaders. He's been asking questions about your visits here, whether you seem confused or forgetful, whether you've made any decisions that didn't make sense." My stomach dropped. "What kinds of questions?" "Whether you repeat instructions, whether you forget people's names, whether you seem to understand the work being done." He told several people that the family is concerned about your health and that they're trying to determine whether you should still be involved in daily operations. "What did people tell him?" Maria looked uncomfortable. "Most people told him you seem fine, that you're sharp as ever. But, Senora, he wasn't just asking questions, he was taking notes, writing down people's responses like he was building some kind of case." "Has anyone else from my family been asking similar questions?" "Your daughter Marisol came by the downtime office building last week. She talked to the cleaning crews about whether you seem confused during your last visit. And that husband of hers, Stephen, he called asking about payroll procedures, whether you'd made any mistakes with employee payments." The scope of their investigation was broader and more systematic than I'd realized. They weren't just building a case based on family observations, they were actively soliciting evidence from employees, looking for any mistake or moment of confusion they could use to support a competency challenge. "Maria, I need you to do something for me," I said. "If any of my family members contact you or other employees with questions about my mental state or business decisions, I want you to document exactly what they ask and when they ask it. Can you do that?" "Of course, Senora. But can I ask what's going on? Are you sick? Are you planning to retire?" I looked at this woman who had worked for me for 15 years, who had become like family to me, who trusted me to provide stable employment for her and dozens of other hardworking people. "Maria, my family is trying to take control of the company by convincing a court that I'm too old and confused to run it properly. Everything they're doing, the questions, the documentation, the meetings with lawyers, it's all designed to build a case that I'm mentally incompetent." Maria's face hardened with an anger I'd rarely seen from her. "But that's not true. You're one of the sharpest business owners I've ever worked for. You remember every employee's name, every detail about our contracts, every safety protocol. I know it's not true, but if they can convince a judge otherwise, they'll gain control of everything we've built,
and I'm not sure they'll run the company with the same values we've always maintained. What can we do to help?" The word "we" made my heart swell with gratitude. At least someone was on my side in this fight. "Help me document the truth," I said. "If they're going to build a case against me, I need to build a stronger case proving my competency." That evening, as I sat in my home office organizing the evidence I'd gathered about my family's conspiracy, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Isabella standing on my porch, alone, which was usual. At 14, she rarely went anywhere without her parents or siblings. "Mija, what are you doing here? Do your parents know where you are?" "They think I'm at soccer practice," she said, looking nervously over her shoulder. "Abuela, can I talk to you? It's important." I invited her in and offered her something to drink, but she seemed too agitated to sit still. She paced around my living room, her artistic hands gesturing as she struggled to find words. "Abuela, what I said last night at your party, I'm sorry. I didn't want to say it, but they made me." My heart stopped. "Who made you?"
Mom and Dad and Uncle Ricardo and Aunt Patricia, they had a meeting before your party, and they told all us kids what we were supposed to say and do. What do you mean? Isabella's eyes filled with tears. They said you were getting old and confused, and that you might make bad decisions that could hurt the family business. They said we needed to help them protect you and protect the company. What did they tell you to do? They gave me specific words to say to you at the end of the party. They said it would help you understand that it was time to let them take care of everything. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But Abuela, it felt wrong. You're not confused or sick. You're the smartest person in our family." I sat down heavily in my armchair, trying to process this confirmation of how calculated and manipulative my family's campaign had been. "Isabella, what else did they tell you kids to do?" "They said to watch for times when you seemed forgetful or confused, and to tell them about it. They said to pay attention if you repeated stories or forgot our names or seemed mixed up about business stuff." "And did you see me doing any of those things?" "No," she said emphatically. "That's why I felt bad about what they made me say. You never seem confused. You remember everything. Our birthdays, our favorite foods, stories from when we were little, details about your work that I don't even understand." "Isabella, has anyone in the family actually seen me acting confused or forgetful?" She shook her head. "Not that I know of, but Uncle Ricardo said that sometimes people your age hide their problems really well, and that's why family has to step in to help." "Did they say anything else about their plans for me or the company?" Isabella looked nervously, as if she was worried someone might be listening. "They talked about you signing papers that would let them make decisions for you. And Aunt Patricia said something about you maybe being happier if you didn't have to worry about business stuff anymore, if you could just relax and let them handle everything." "Did they say anything about where I might live or what I might do if I wasn't running the company?" "Wayla mentioned something about a really nice place where you could live and have people take care of you, where you wouldn't have to worry about cooking or cleaning or any responsibilities." Isabella's voice got smaller. "But, Abuela, I don't want you to go away. I don't want to only see you on special visits." The picture was becoming clearer and more horrifying. Not only were they planning to take control of my business, but they were also planning to have me institutionalized in some kind of assisted living facility where they could control my contact with the outside world. "Isabella, I need you to help me understand something. When you said, 'This is your last one,' about my birthday, what did they tell you that meant?" She looked down to her shoes, clearly ashamed. "They said it meant it was the last birthday where you'd have to worry about business responsibilities, the last one where you'd be stressed about making big decisions. They said after this, you'd be free to just enjoy being a grandmother. But you knew it sounded threatening when you said it." "Yeah," she whispered. "It felt mean, like we were telling you that your life was ending instead of celebrating you." I stood up and hugged my youngest granddaughter, this brave girl who had risked her parents' anger to warn me about what was coming. "Isabella, I need you to promise me something.
If you hear any more conversations about plans for me or the company, I want you to remember as much as you can and tell me about it. Can you do that? What if they find out I told you? Then we'll figure out how to keep you safe. But right now, you might be the only person who can help me protect myself and protect all the jobs that depend on our company staying in good hands. As Isabella prepared to leave, she turned back to me with tears in her eyes. Abuela, are you going to be okay? Are they really going to try to make you go away? I looked at this granddaughter who had shown more courage and integrity than any of the adults in our family, and I made her a promise I intended to keep. Isabella, your great-grandmother didn't survive poverty and abuse in Mexico, and I didn't build a company from nothing in a foreign country just to be defeated by people who think they can steal what they didn't earn. They're going to try, but they're not going to succeed. How do you know? Because I'm not the confused old woman they think I am. I'm the same woman who came here with nothing and built all of this. And that woman knows how to fight. After Isabella left, I sat in my living room with the legal documents spread across my coffee table, thinking about everything I'd learned over the past 2 days. My family hadn't just decided to exploit my generosity. They had developed a comprehensive plan to systematically strip away my rights, my autonomy, and my life's work. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They underestimated the woman they were targeting. I'd built an empire from nothing once before. Now I was going to have to fight to keep it. And this time, I knew exactly who my enemies were.
The morning after Isabella's confession, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. My family thought they were dealing with a confused old woman who would quietly accept their manipulation. They were about to discover that the mind that built a multi-million-dollar empire was still sharp enough to dismantle their schemes piece by piece. But first, I needed allies. And I needed them fast. At 6 a.m., I called Sarah Gonzalez at her home number, something I'd never done before, but desperate times required desperate measures. Esperanza? Sarah's voice was groggy but quickly became alert when she heard the urgency in my tone. What's happened? My family's timeline has accelerated. I need to move immediately to protect myself and my assets before they can file any legal challenges. Come to my office at 8, she said without hesitation, and bring everything, financial records, business documents, the papers they want you to sign, any communications you've had with them about this situation. Sarah, there's something else. My 14-year-old granddaughter warned me that this entire plan was orchestrated before my birthday party. They've been coaching the children, interviewing my employees, and building what they think is a case against me. Jesus Christ, Sarah muttered. Esperanza? This is worse than I thought. We're not just dealing with opportunistic family members. This is a coordinated campaign. 2 hours later, I sat in Sarah's office with boxes of documents while she reviewed the ownership transfer papers with the intense focus of a prosecutor examining evidence. These documents are incredibly sophisticated, she said after nearly an hour of reading. Whoever prepared these knows exactly what they're doing. The competency review clauses, the medical evaluation requirements, the unanimous consent provisions. This is designed to trap you completely once you sign. What do you mean? Once you transfer 75% ownership, the majority owners can initiate competency proceedings based on any business decision they disagree with. They can require you to undergo psychological evaluations by doctors they choose. They can override your decisions by claiming you lack capacity. And the way it's structured, even if you could prove your competency later, regaining control would be nearly impossible. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. Esperanza, I need to ask you something difficult. Is there any chance at all, that your children genuinely believe you're experiencing cognitive decline? Could this be misguided concern rather than calculated greed? I thought about Isabella's confession, about Patricia's comments about practical changes to increase profits, about the secret increase in my life insurance policy. No, I said firmly, this is about money and control. They want the business, and they've decided the fastest way to get it is to have me declared incompetent. Then we need to move fast, and we need to be smart about it.
First, we're going to document your cognitive capacity so thoroughly that no court would ever question it. Second, we're going to investigate their financial motives and any evidence of coordination. Third, we're going to protect your assets before they can freeze them. Sarah pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. I'm going to arrange for you to be evaluated by the best neuropsychologist in the state, someone whose credentials and reputation are unassailable. We'll also get comprehensive medical examinations from multiple doctors to establish that you're in excellent health for your age. What about the business? We're going to create some insurance policies of our own. If they try to have you declared incompetent, we want evidence that you're actively managing complex business operations successfully. She looked up from her notes. Esperanza, I need to warn you, this is going to get ugly. When they realize you're fighting back, they're going to escalate their tactics. Are you prepared for that? I thought about everything I'd survived. Poverty in Mexico, domestic violence, building a business from nothing in a foreign country, raising children alone, losing my husband. Sarah, I've been fighting my entire life. The only difference now is that I know exactly who my enemies are. Over the next 3 days, Sarah and I assembled what she called a comprehensive defense strategy. It felt like preparing for war, which I suppose it was. Dr. Amanda Chen, the neuropsychologist Sarah recommended, was a woman in her 50s who specialized in capacity evaluations for elder law cases. She had testified as an expert witness in over 200 competency hearings and had never had her professional opinion successfully challenged in court. Mrs. Castellanos, I want to be completely honest with you about what this evaluation will involve. We're going to spend approximately 6 hours over 2 sessions conducting the most comprehensive cognitive assessment available. We'll test memory, executive function, problem solving, language processing, and decision-making capacity. Will the results be definitive?
The testing was exhausting, but fascinating. Dr. Chen evaluated everything from my ability to remember complex sequences of information to my capacity to analyze hypothetical business scenarios and make sound decisions. She tested my understanding of financial concepts, my ability to process new information, and my comprehension of legal and contractual language. Mrs. Castellanos, she said as we finished the second session, I can tell you informally that your cognitive function is not only normal for your age, it's superior. Your working memory, analytical reasoning, and decision-making capacity would be impressive in someone 30 years younger. Will that be enough to protect me legally? Combined with the other evidence your attorney is gathering, it should make any competency challenge extremely difficult to sustain. Meanwhile, Sarah had hired a private investigator named James Rodriguez to look into my family's financial situations and recent activities. James was a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes and elder abuse cases. "What am I looking for?" he asked during our initial meeting. "Evidence for financial motivation," Sarah explained. "Debts, gambling problems, expensive purchases, anything that might explain why they need access to Mrs. Castellanos' assets urgently. Also," I added, "I want to know if they've been meeting with other attorneys, accountants, or financial advisors. And I want documentation of their attempts to gather evidence against me from employees and medical professionals." James nodded. "This kind of coordinated family conspiracy usually leaves a paper trail. If they've been planning this systematically, there will be records." While Sarah and James worked on the legal and investigative aspects of my defense, I focused on building something my family hadn't anticipated: a network of witnesses who could testify to my competency and their manipulative behavior. I started with Maria Santos, who had already proven her loyalty and courage by warning me about my family's employee interviews. "Maria, I need you to ask you to do something that might be difficult," I said during a private meeting at our main office. "If this situation goes to court, I may need you and other long-term employees to testify about my mental capacity and my family's recent behavior." "Of course, Señora, but what exactly would we testify about?"
your observations of my business decisions over the past year, examples of my memory, problem solving, and leadership, any interactions you've had with my children where they asked inappropriate questions or made concerning comments. Maria thought for a moment. There was something else I didn't mention before. About 3 weeks ago, your son Eduardo came to the hospital site and asked to see the maintenance schedules you'd reviewed the previous week. He said he was checking to make sure you hadn't missed anything important or made any mistakes. Did he find any mistakes? No, but he spent over an hour going through everything, taking photographs with his phone. And he asked me not to mention his visit to you because he said it might hurt your feelings to know the family was double-checking your work. This was exactly the kind of evidence I needed. Documentation of their systematic attempts to find proof of incompetence while hiding their activities from me. Over the next several days, I met quietly with 12 key employees who had worked with me for more than 5 years. The conversations were revealing in ways I hadn't expected. Carlos Mendez, our head of maintenance operations, told me about a conversation with Ricardo where my son had suggested that the company needed younger leadership to handle modern business challenges. Linda Park, our office manager, described a phone call from Marisol asking for copies of business correspondence I'd written over the past 6 months, supposedly to help with filing organization. Frank Williams, our senior construction supervisor, shared that Steven Rodriguez had asked him detailed questions about my site visits, specifically whether I seemed confused about project specifications or safety protocols. Each employee described similar experiences, family members probing for evidence of my incompetence while presenting their inquiries as concern or routine business review. But more importantly, every single employee expressed the same sentiment. I was as sharp and capable as I ever been, and the suggestion that I lacked capacity to run the business was absurd. Señora Esperanza, Carlos said, you remember details about projects from 5 years ago. You notice problems that younger managers miss. If anyone thinks you're too old or confused to run this company, they don't know you at all. While I was building my witness network, James Rodriguez was uncovering information about my family's financial motivations that shocked even me. Mrs. Castellanos, he said, spreading documents across Sarah's conference table, your children's financial situations are much worse than you probably realized. The evidence was damning. Ricardo and Patricia had taken out a $400,000 home equity loan against their house 6 months earlier, with monthly payments they could barely afford on their current income. They'd also accumulated over $75,000 in credit card debt, much of it from expensive vacations and luxury purchases that were completely inconsistent with Ricardo's salary as the company's CFO.
Marisol and Steven's situation was even worse. Steven's gambling debts totaled nearly $200,000, owed to sources that James described as potentially dangerous if not repaid quickly. They'd already borrowed against Steven's 401k, taken cash advances on multiple credit cards, and received several loans from me that had never been repaid. Eduardo's lifestyle was being subsidized by credit cards and personal loans that were approaching their limits. His monthly expenses exceeded his income by approximately $3,000, and he'd been covering the difference through increasingly creative financial arrangements. The timing is crucial, James explained. All 3 families reached financial crisis points within the past 6 months. That's when the coordination of this plan against you likely began. But there's something else, he continued, pulling out another set of documents. I found evidence that they've been meeting regularly without you. Family financial planning sessions, they called them. The documents showed rental receipts for private conference rooms at hotels, along with meeting notes that had been accidentally left in Steven's car and found by a parking lot attendant who turned them in to hotel security. The notes were devastating. They contained detailed discussions about my declining capacity, strategies for documenting incidents of confusion, and timelines for implementing what they called the transition plan. One particularly damning section outlined their strategy. Phase 1,
Document incidents and gather professional opinions. Phase 2, pressure for ownership transfer and medical evaluations. Phase 3, competency challenge if necessary. Timeline, complete by Christmas to avoid complications with year-end business cycle. Christmas? I said. That's only 2 months away. They were planning to have you declared incompetent and potentially institutionalized by the end of the year, James confirmed. Based on these notes, they'd already researched assisted living facilities and were prepared to move quickly once they gained legal control. Sarah looked up from the documents with an expression of barely controlled anger. This isn't just elder abuse, it's conspiracy to commit fraud. These meeting notes could be used to pursue criminal charges. Do we have enough evidence to stop them? We have enough evidence to destroy them, she said grimly. But first, we need to make sure they can't implement any part of their plan while we're building our case. Sarah's strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of waiting for my family to make their move, we were going to force their hand while controlling the circumstances. We're going to call a family meeting, but not the kind they're expecting. We're going to present them with our evidence and give them one opportunity to abandon their scheme voluntarily. What if they refuse? Then we'll know they're committed to this course of action and we'll respond accordingly. But there's a chance that confronting them with proof of what we've discovered might shock them into reconsidering. The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday at 2 p.m. in the conference room at Sarah's law office. I called each of my children and their spouses individually, telling them only that I needed to discuss important business and legal matters with the family. Ricardo tried to convince me to hold the meeting at our company office instead, but I insisted on the neutral location. Patricia asked if she should bring the elder law attorneys they'd been consulting, but I told her that wouldn't be necessary. Eduardo seemed nervous when I called him, asking repeatedly if something was wrong and whether he should be concerned about the meeting's agenda. When I called Marisol, she immediately assumed the meeting was about me signing the ownership transfer documents they'd presented. "Finally, Mommy," she said with obvious relief. "I was starting to worry that you were having second thoughts about protecting the family business." "Oh, I'm definitely focused on protecting the family business. I think you'll find the meeting very enlightening." The days leading up to the confrontation felt like the calm before a storm. I knew that once I revealed what I'd discovered, there would be no going back to our previous family relationships. But I also knew that those relationships had been based on lies and manipulation for months, if not longer. Isabella called me twice during that week, worried about the tension she was sensing at home. "Abuela, everyone seems really nervous about this meeting you called. Mom and Dad keep having whispered conversations that stop when I walk into the room. Are you worried about what might happen?" "I'm worried about you," she said honestly. "I know they're planning something bad, and I don't want you to get hurt. Isabella, remember what I told you about your great-grandmother surviving difficult times and me building this company from nothing? Yes? Sometimes the people who love you have to fight to protect you from the people who are supposed to love you. That's what this meeting is about. Will you be okay? I'll be better than okay, mija. I'll be free." Friday morning, I woke up feeling calmer than I had since this nightmare began. I dressed carefully in one of my best business suits, the navy blue ensemble I'd worn to important contract negotiations and board meetings. If I was going to confront my children about their betrayal, I wanted to look like the successful businesswoman I was, not the confused elderly victim they thought they were manipulating.
Sarah and I met an hour before the family arrived to review our strategy and organize the evidence we'd gathered. "Remember," she said, "the goal isn't to punish them, it's to stop them. If they agree to abandon this scheme completely, we can potentially resolve this without destroying the family entirely. And if they don't, then we'll know we're dealing with people who prioritize money over family and will respond accordingly." At exactly 2 p.m., my 3 children and their spouses filed into Sarah's conference room. They looked uncomfortable in the formal legal setting, clearly wondering why I'd chosen to meet them in an attorney's office rather than in our usual family venues. Ricardo sat at the far end of the table with Patricia beside him.
both of them maintaining the careful composure they'd perfected during their years of business partnerships. Marisol and Stephen chose seats in the middle, with Marisol looking hopeful and Stephen appearing nervous. Eduardo sat closest to me, his artistic sensitivity making him the most visibly anxious person in the room. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing at the head of the conference table like I'd done at countless business meetings over the years. "I've asked Sarah to be present because what we need to discuss has significant legal implications." I looked around the table at the faces of people I'd loved unconditionally, people I'd sacrificed for, people I'd trusted with my most important business responsibilities. Over the past 2 weeks, I've discovered that members of this family have been conspiring to have me declared mentally incompetent so they can gain control of my business assets. The silence in the room was deafening. Ricardo went pale, Patricia's jaw tightened, Marisol looked genuinely shocked, Stephen stared at his hands, and Eduardo appeared to be fighting back tears. I know about the meetings with elder law attorneys. I know about the systematic interviews with my employees looking for evidence of confusion or incompetence. I know about the coaching session before my birthday party where you instructed Isabella to deliver a threatening message. Patricia recovered first, her voice taking on the smooth, reasonable tone she used when she thought someone was being unreasonably difficult. "Esperanza, I think you're misunderstanding our motivations. We've been concerned about some changes we've observed, and we've been researching options to protect you and the business." "Changes like what, Patricia? Memory issues? Difficulty with complex decisions? Moments of confusion during business meetings?" Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Can you provide specific examples of these memory issues and moments of confusion?" The question hung in the air. Patricia looked to Ricardo for support, but my son seemed incapable of speech. "I thought so. Because there aren't real examples, are there? There are only fabricated concerns designed to justify a predetermined plan to steal my company." I nodded to Sarah, who began distributing copies of the evidence we'd assembled. Bank statements showing their financial crises, meeting notes outlining their conspiracy, documentation of their attempts to gather evidence against me, and transcripts of employee interviews describing their suspicious behavior. As they reviewed the materials, I watched their faces change from defensive confusion to recognition to something that looked like fear. "This is what I know," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I know that all 3 of your families are facing serious financial crises. I know that you've been meeting secretly to plan how to gain control of my assets. I know that you've been systematically attempting to build a case for my incompetence based on fabricated evidence." I paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle over them. "What I don't know is whether you genuinely convinced yourselves that this was somehow in my best interest, or whether you simply decided that your financial problems justified stealing from your mother." Eduardo was the first to break, tears streaming down his face as he looked up at me. "Mommy, I'm so sorry. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We were just scared. About money, about the future, about what would happen to all of us if something happened to you." "Eduardo, nothing is going to happen to me. I'm in excellent health, my mind is sharp, and I'm perfectly capable of running the business I built." "But Patricia said that people your age often decline quickly, and that we needed to be prepared." "Patricia said what she needed to say to convince you to participate in a scheme to steal my company. The question now is what you're all going to do about it." Ricardo finally found his voice, though it was weak and uncertain. "Mommy, maybe we made some mistakes in how we approached this, but our concerns were genuine. We love you, and we want to protect you." "Ricardo, you increased my life insurance to $2 million without my knowledge or consent. That's not protection. That's preparation." The accusation hit him like a physical blow. He looked around the table at his siblings and their spouses, seeming to realize for the first time the full implications of what they'd been planning. I that was just, we thought, you thought that if I died or was declared incompetent, you'd collect enough money to solve all your financial problems, I said bluntly. Sarah leaned forward. Let's be very clear about the legal situation you're all facing. What you've done so far constitutes conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, attempted fraud, and potentially extortion. If Mrs. Castellanos chooses to pursue criminal charges, you could all face felony convictions and prison time.
The room erupted in shocked voices, protests, denials, pleas for understanding. But I held up my hand for silence, and the power of decades of family authority still commanded their attention. I'm going to give you one opportunity to make this right, I said. You will immediately cease all contact with elder law attorneys. You will destroy any documentation you've created about my supposed incompetence. You will never again question my mental capacity or attempt to interfere with my medical care. And you will sign agreements acknowledging that I am mentally competent and that any future claims to the contrary are false and malicious. I looked directly at Ricardo. You will also return my life insurance policy to its original amount and remove yourselves from any beneficiary designations that don't align with my existing estate plan. And if we agree to all of this? Marisol asked quietly. Then we try to rebuild our family relationships based on honesty instead of manipulation. Your financial problems are your own to solve, but I won't punish you for making mistakes if you're willing to abandon this course of action completely. And if we don't agree? Patricia asked, her voice harder than I'd ever heard it. Sarah answered before I could speak. Then Mrs. Castellanos will pursue all available legal remedies, including criminal charges for conspiracy and fraud. Your financial situations will become public record, your reputations will be destroyed, and you'll face the very real possibility of prison sentences. The silence that followed was the longest of my life. I watched my children and their spouses exchange looks, seeing them weigh their options and calculate their risks. Finally, Eduardo spoke through his tears. I'll sign whatever you need me to sign, Mommy. I never wanted to hurt you. I made terrible choices and I'm sorry. One by one, the others agreed to my terms. Even Patricia, who looked like she was swallowing poison, nodded her consent. But as Sarah began preparing the legal agreements that would formalize their promises, I realized that this confrontation was just the beginning. They'd agreed to my terms because they had no choice, but the greed and sense of entitlement that had driven their conspiracy hadn't disappeared. It had just been temporarily suppressed by fear of consequences. The war for my life and legacy wasn't over. It was just moving into a new phase. 2 weeks after the confrontation in Sarah's office, I thought the nightmare was finally over. My children had signed the legal agreements, acknowledged my competency, and promised to abandon their scheme. The life insurance policy had been returned to its original amount. The elder law attorneys had been dismissed. For a brief moment, I believed that family love had triumphed over greed. I was wrong. The first sign that they hadn't truly given up came when Isabella called me in tears on a Thursday evening in early November. Abuela, something's happening at home. Mom and Dad think I don't understand, but I heard them talking to Uncle Ricardo and Aunt Patricia again. My heart sank. What did you hear, mija? They said the first plan didn't work, but they found another way. They kept saying something about alternative strategies and new approaches. Abuela, I think they're still trying to hurt you. That night, I called Sarah and asked her to have James Rodriguez resume his surveillance of my family's activities. What he discovered over the next week made my blood run cold.
Despite their signed agreements, my children had not abandoned their conspiracy. They had simply adapted it. Unable to pursue competency challenges directly, they were now working on what Patricia called environmental solutions. James's investigation revealed a series of meetings with different types of professionals: a security consultant who specialized in elderly safety assessments, a social worker who helped families navigate crisis interventions, and most disturbing of all, a private investigator who specialized in documenting unsafe living conditions for vulnerable adults. The plan they'd developed was more insidious than their original conspiracy. Instead of trying to prove I was mentally incompetent, they were going to create situations that would make me appear physically unsafe or unable to care for myself properly. James discovered that they'd hired the private investigator to conduct surveillance of my daily activities, looking for any incidents that could be interpreted as dangerous or concerning. The security consultant had been asked to evaluate my home for age-related safety risks. The social worker was being consulted about the legal process for emergency interventions when elderly people were living in unsuitable conditions. But the most chilling discovery came when James intercepted a conversation between Ricardo and a man named Vincent Torres, who apparently specialized in what he called incident creation. It needs to look completely natural. A fall, maybe, some confusion about medications, something that would justify immediate intervention. "I understand," Torres replied. "These situations require careful planning, but they can be very effective. Once there's a documented emergency, family members can obtain temporary guardianship very quickly." I listened to that recording in Sarah's office with a mixture of horror and disbelief. My own son was discussing having someone stage accidents that could seriously injure or even kill me. "Esperanza," Sarah said grimly, "this has escalated far beyond financial abuse. They are now discussing what could constitute attempted murder or conspiracy to commit bodily harm. What can we do?" "We're going to set a trap, and then we're going to end this permanently."
Sarah's plan was elegant and comprehensive. We would let my family believe their new scheme was working while documenting every aspect of their criminal conspiracy. First, we arranged for hidden cameras to be installed throughout my house by a security company that specialized in elder protection cases. The cameras were virtually invisible but would record everything that happened in my home. Second, James would continue his surveillance of their meetings and communications, building a complete record of their planning and coordination. Third, I would begin acting slightly more vulnerable in public, using a cane occasionally, mentioning minor aches and pains, creating the impression that age was finally catching up with me. This would encourage them to accelerate their timeline. "The goal," Sarah explained, "is to let them commit to a specific plan and begin implementing it. Once we have them attempting to cause you harm, we'll have grounds for criminal charges that will put them in prison for decades." The hardest part was maintaining normal family relationships while knowing what they were planning. When Ricardo called to check on me, expressing fake concern about my well-being, I had to respond naturally. When Marisol visited and asked probing questions about my daily routines and health, I had to seem unsuspecting. Eduardo was the most difficult to deal with because his emotional distress appeared genuine. During one visit, he broke down crying and begged me to forgive him for everything that had happened. "Mommy, I hate what we've become," he said, tears streaming down his face. "This whole situation has destroyed our family." "Eduardo, the family can be repaired if people choose honesty over greed," I replied carefully. "But what if it's too late? What if we've gone too far to turn back?" I looked at my youngest son, this artistic soul who had somehow become involved in a conspiracy to harm his own mother, and I realized that he might be the key to ending this nightmare
without destroying everyone I'd once loved. It's never too late to do the right thing, I told him, but it has to be a choice, and it has to be soon. 3 weeks after we'd set our trap, Vincent Torres made his move. It was a Saturday morning in late November, and I was working in my garden when I noticed a man in work clothes approaching my back gate. "Mrs. Castellanos, I'm from the city water department. We need to check your main water line for a potential leak." I knew immediately that this was Torres. James had shown me surveillance photos of him, but I played along, leading him to the basement where the water main entered my house. What happened next was captured in perfect detail by our hidden cameras. Torres began tampering with the water heater connections, creating what would appear to be a gas leak. If the leak had been real, and I'd been unaware of it, I could have been overcome by carbon monoxide, or the house could have exploded. While he worked, he kept up a steady conversation designed to make me seem confused or forgetful on the recording he was secretly making. "Now, Mrs. Castellanos, when was the last time you had this water heater serviced?" "I think it was last spring." "Last spring? Are you sure it wasn't much longer ago? This equipment looks like it hasn't been maintained in years." "No, I'm quite certain it was serviced recently." He continued questioning me about routine household maintenance, clearly trying to get me to appear confused or uncertain about basic home safety issues. After he left, I immediately called the real water department to report the incident. They confirmed that they had no record of any scheduled maintenance in my area and that the person who had visited me was not one of their employees. But more importantly, our cameras had recorded everything. We had clear evidence of Torres deliberately creating a dangerous situation in my home while trying to make me appear incompetent to handle basic safety issues. That afternoon, Ricardo called with perfectly timed concern. "Mommy, I've been worried about you living alone in that big house. Have you been keeping up with all the maintenance? I'd hate for something to happen because of neglected safety issues." "What kind of safety issues?" I asked, playing my part in their script. "Oh, things like the water heater, gas connections, electrical systems. At your age, it's easy to overlook important maintenance." 2 hours later, Marisol arrived unannounced with Steven, both of them carrying overnight bags. "Mommy, we've decided to stay with you for a few days. We want to help you go through the house and make sure everything is safe." "That's not necessary," I protested mildly. "Of course it's necessary. You're 70 years old, living alone in a house that's decades old. There could be all kinds of hazards you haven't noticed." What followed was the most surreal weekend of my life. My daughter and son-in-law systematically went through my house, documenting what they claimed were safety violations and maintenance issues that proved I could no longer live independently. They took photographs of a slightly loose handrail, a minor water stain on a bathroom ceiling, and kitchen appliances they claimed were dangerous for someone with your reflexes. They made notes about my medicine cabinet, suggesting that I might be taking medications incorrectly. They even questioned my ability to safely operate my car, despite the fact that I'd had no accidents or tickets in over 20 years. All of this was being recorded by our hidden cameras, creating a perfect record of their systematic attempt to build a case for my incompetence. Monday morning, I received a call from Adult Protective Services. "Mrs. Castellanos, we've received a report of unsafe living conditions at your residence. We need to schedule an immediate home inspection and wellness check." The report had been filed by my own children, claiming that I was living in hazardous conditions and was unable to maintain my home safely. It included photographs from their weekend documentation session and statements about my alleged confusion and poor judgment. But instead of being frightened or overwhelmed, I felt a surge of satisfaction. They had walked directly into our trap. I called Sarah immediately. They filed the APS report. It's time. Perfect. I'll contact the district attorney's office and the FBI. We have enough evidence to pursue federal charges for elder abuse conspiracy and attempted endangerment. That afternoon, while Marisol and Stephen were still staying at my house to monitor my safety, law enforcement officers arrived with search and arrest warrants. The look of shock on my daughter's face when she realized what was happening will stay with me forever. She had been so confident in her plan, so certain that she was finally going to gain control of my assets, that the possibility of consequences had never seemed real to her. Marisol Rodriguez, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, filing false reports, and attempted endangerment, the FBI agent announced as he placed handcuffs on my daughter in my own living room. Stephen was arrested on the same charges. Within hours, Ricardo, Patricia, and Eduardo had been taken into custody as well. Vincent Torres was charged with trespassing, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy. The evidence against them was overwhelming. We had recordings of their planning meetings, documentation of their attempts to create false evidence, video footage of Torres sabotaging my home, and testimony from multiple witnesses about their systematic campaign against me. The trials took 8 months to complete, but the outcomes were decisive. Ricardo, as the apparent ringleader, received 7 years in federal prison. Patricia got 5 years. Marisol and Stephen each received 4 years. Eduardo, who cooperated fully with prosecutors and provided detailed testimony about the conspiracy, received 2 years of supervised probation and community service. Vincent Torres received 10 years for his role in creating dangerous conditions in an elderly person's home. But the criminal justice was only part of the resolution. The business implications were equally significant. With 3 of my 4 intended heirs facing felony convictions, I had to completely restructure my succession planning. I promoted Maria Santos to Chief Operating Officer and began training her to eventually take over day-to-day operations. I established a board of directors that included several longtime employees and trusted business partners. Most importantly, I created a foundation that would ensure the company's values of treating employees with dignity and supporting the community would continue regardless of who owned it in the future. The most difficult part of this entire experience wasn't the betrayal or the legal battles. It was explaining to my grandchildren why their parents were going to prison. Isabella, now 15, handled the truth better than I had expected. She had seen enough of her parents' planning to understand that they had chosen greed over family loyalty. "Abuela," she said during one of our weekly dinners, "I'm sorry they hurt you, but I'm proud of you for fighting back. You showed me that being old doesn't mean being weak." Diego and Lucia, Ricardo's children, struggled more with accepting their parents' crimes. But over time, they came to understand that I had tried to give their parents multiple opportunities to choose a different path. The twins, Carlos and Carmen, initially blamed me for their parents' imprisonment, but as they matured and learned more about what really happened, they began to appreciate the courage it had taken for me to protect myself and the business that supported so many families. Eduardo's cooperation during the legal proceedings opened the door for his rehabilitation in ways that surprised everyone. The therapy and counseling required as part of his probation helped him address the insecurities and financial irresponsibility that had made him vulnerable to his siblings' manipulation. "Mommy," he told me during one of our supervised visits, "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I learned something from this nightmare." Today, 3 years after that terrible birthday party where Isabella told me it was my last one, Eduardo works as a counselor for families dealing with elder abuse situations. He uses his experience as someone who participated in such abuse to help others understand how financial desperation can corrupt family relationships. I'm 73 now, and the business I built from nothing continues to thrive under management that values integrity over profit. We employ over 300 people, provide excellent benefits, and maintain contracts worth over $20 million annually. But more importantly, our company has become a model for how businesses can protect elderly owners from family exploitation. We've developed policies and procedures that other companies now use to identify and prevent elder financial abuse. I speak regularly at conferences for business owners, law enforcement, and social workers, sharing my story and the lessons I learned about protecting yourself when the people you trust most become the ones who want to harm you.
One letter from a 68-year-old woman in Texas particularly moved me. "Mrs. Castellanos, your story gave me the courage to question why my son suddenly wanted to help me simplify my finances. When I hired my own attorney to review his proposals,
I discovered he'd been planning to steal everything I'd saved for retirement. Because of your example, I was able to stop him before he succeeded. As I finish writing this story, I want to share the most important lessons I learned from this experience. First, age is not a weakness. Experience is a strength. The same qualities that allow you to build a successful life, intelligence, intuition, determination, don't disappear just because you reach a certain birthday. Second, family loyalty should never be unconditional when it comes to your safety and security. Love your children, but don't let that love blind you to their capacity for harm when they become desperate. Third, document everything. If someone is trying to take advantage of you, they're probably leaving evidence of their plans. Don't be afraid to investigate, to ask questions, to demand answers. Fourth, seek help from professionals who work for you, not for your family. Lawyers, doctors, accountants, and financial advisors who are chosen and paid by family members may not have your best interests at heart. Finally, remember that fighting back isn't about revenge, it's about justice. When you protect yourself from exploitation, you're also protecting other potential victims and upholding the principle that taking advantage of elderly people is never acceptable. My name is Esperanza Delgado-Castellanos. I came to this country with nothing but hope and determination. I built a business empire through hard work and integrity. And when my own family tried to steal everything I'd worked for, I fought back and won. That birthday wasn't my last one. It was the beginning of a new chapter where I learned that the woman who survived poverty and built success from nothing was strong enough to survive betrayal and build justice from courage. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, remember, you are never too old to fight for yourself, and it's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. The people who try to convince you that age makes you vulnerable are often the ones who want to take advantage of that supposed vulnerability. Prove them wrong. What would you have done in my situation? Have you seen warning signs of financial exploitation in your own family or community? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else recognize these tactics before it's too late. Thank you for staying with me through this difficult but ultimately empowering journey. Remember, wisdom isn't lost with age, it's gained through experience. And sometimes that experience includes learning how to protect yourself from the people who are supposed to love you most.